record. I'm Esquire, your presiding officer of the court, calling case number 23-01, The People versus the defendant, the Nintendo Famicom. The defendant has been charged with being too overpriced to add to your gaming collection. In today's proceedings, we'll determine whether it's worth spending your hard-earned money on a Nintendo Famicom, or whether you're better off saving your cash and just emulating it. In order to render a verdict, we'll hear opening statements, take some direct and cross-examination, review forensic evidence, and listen to testimony from an expert witness. Finally, after hearing all of the evidence presented, I will render my verdict as to whether the defendant is worth buying or only worth emulating. So, without further ado, let's put the Nintendo Famicom on trial. If you were to write a book about the history of video games, the book's biggest chapter should be devoted to the Nintendo Famicom. It's the reason I'm here right now, talking to you, making this video, and it's probably the reason you're here watching this video too. It's the reason I fell in love with video games. It's really the one that started it all. And I know, boomers, I know exactly what you're thinking. Wait a minute, there was Atari, there was Intellivision, there was Odyssey, and yeah, they were there, but let's be honest, those games sucked. Actually, no, okay, they didn't suck. They were actually pretty great for their time, considering the hardware that they were being played on. But when you compared those games to the Famicom, those games sucked. With that generation of games, you really needed to bring a healthy imagination to the table. Like, you see that blinking pixel over there? Well, that's a human. And you see that blob of pixels there? Well, that's a city. This weird thing? I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. There's generally no music in these games. There's no objective in any of these games. You basically just play the game over and over and over again, and the game gets progressively more and more difficult, and then you die. And then you get a high score, and then you can compare your high score to your friend's high score, and that's basically it. And that's fine, but to me, that's a toy. But here comes the Famicom, and now you have an experience. Now you can finally check your imagination at the door. You can find yourself getting immersed by the game. There's a narrative now. You have an objective. Save Princess Toadstool. Collect the Triforce and defeat Ganon. Destroy the Mother Brain and exit Planet Zebes. Infiltrate Dracula's castle and whip him in the face. And for the first time, you find yourself being pulled into this experience because you're hearing some of the best music that's ever been heard in video games. Famicom was released in Japan on July 15th, 1983, with count them, three games available at launch. Nearly arcade-quality ports of Popeye, Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong Jr. At that same time, the West was in the midst of the entire home video game industry crashing to near extinction, with unsold, low-quality shovelware that both retailers and customers had grown weary of. According to the New York Times, by August of 1983, Atari was operating at a $500 million, that's billion with a B, dollar deficit. The Times reported, quote, "Some children, fickle as ever, have cut down their game playing for the most childlike reason of all, boredom." The Times interviewed little 12-year-old Chris Foudy of Crestkill, New Jersey, who said, quote, "A while back, a lot of games like Pac-Man, I used to like a lot. Now these games are really boring. They're all the same. You kill the invaders, and that's it. Boring." And you know what, little Chris Foudy of Crestkill, New Jersey? You're right. Do you hear that, boomers? Those games sucked. What? What are you going to do? You're going to argue with a 12-year-old? You know what, Boomer? You're a jerk. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Famicom was a very compelling sales pitch. Here are three arcade quality ports of beloved arcade games, all released within the last 2 years. You can save your quarters and play your favorite arcade games from the comforts of your own home. And throughout the rest of 1983, Nintendo would go on to publish 6 more games for the Famicom, which included a sports title, 2 educational titles, and Mahjong. Because, Grandpa needs something to play too, I guess. The Famicom had only modest success in Japan in 1983, hampered in large part by hardware shortages and recalls to existing stock on the market. But by 1984, third parties began to take notice and started publishing software for the Famicom, namely Hudson Soft and Namco. And the Famicom became the best-selling console in Japan by year's end. With 1985, more third-party publishers joined the fray, including Jaleco, Enix, Taito, Irem, and Konami, who at the time was a prolific developer for the MSX computer in Japan. Most importantly, in 1985 came the Famicom's killer app, Super Mario Bros., which would go on to be not only the platform's best-selling title, but one of the best-selling games of all time, and the rest, as they say, was history. So, obviously, the Famicom's pilgrimage to the West was inevitable. After appearing on store shelves in New York and LA in late 1985, the Famicom launched nationwide in the United States in 1986, and during its lifespan, the console sold nearly 62 million units worldwide. By 1988, just less than 5 years from the Famicom's launch, Nintendo had gone from this little niche Japanese toy maker to a literal global cultural phenomenon. The word Nintendo became synonymous with video games, like Kleenex is to tissue, or Billy Mitchell is to cheater. I mean, I can remember being 10 years old, playing Mortal Kombat for the Sega Genesis in my bedroom, and in walks in my grandmother, who says, and I quote,
"Raji, are you playing your Nintendo?"
It's not Nintendo, Grandma. It's Sega Genesis. Idiot.
I'm just kidding. I would never say that to my grandma. I love you, Grandma. Obviously, the Famicom is a legendary success story, and it has some incredible qualities. It's certainly worth spending the money to add it to your collection. But there are a lot of quirks about the Famicom that may also drive you crazy. So let's get into those now with some direct and cross-examination. So, some things I like about the Famicom. First, let's just get the aesthetics out of the way. I absolutely love the Famicom's design. It's an evolution of what was previously seen with Nintendo's Game & Watch line from the same era. It has this off-white case adorned with bold burgundy and gold accents throughout. Large gold plating is nestled into the front burgundy controllers, hardwired directly to the rear of the console's motherboard with little grooved slots on each side of the main unit for storage. A bright red eject button is flanked by power and reset buttons, and a large plastic flap protects the 60-pin cartridge connector from dust and debris. Finally, there's a small expansion port found here in the front of the console with another dust cap to be used for peripherals and other accessories. When you see a Game & Watch side by side with the Famicom's controller, you begin to see the design evolution. Nintendo wasn't afraid of looking garish. There's gold plastic everywhere. Gold was a really popular choice for the company at the time. It just looks like such a huge departure from what would become the Nintendo Entertainment System, which was designed to look more at home in the electronics section of the department store next to the stereos and the VCRs. I mean, this was high-end entertainment, not a kid's toy, despite coming with a toy robot. Whatever. The case on the NES was a utilitarian gray with black and red accents, and the cartridges would slide into the front of the console tray just like VHS cassettes. Because remember, here in the United States, things have to be serious and gritty. They can't be fun and colorful like they are in Japan. As an aside, I would be remiss if I didn't say that at times I tend to say US or States or America or the United States of America when I really should be saying North America. My Canadian friends get upset when I don't include our amazing neighbors to the north in this discourse, but to that I say, you know what, Canada? Why don't you do something about it? Why don't you come fight the United States? What happened last time you tried messing with us? I think you remember. I think you remember. I'm just playing. Canada, I love you guys. Cheers. Oh. Next, let's talk about the games. Not really the games per se, some of which were classics and some of the best games ever made, but I'm talking about the cartridges themselves. Famicom cartridges were also a huge departure in design from their Western counterparts. Most of the time, the same two games would have completely different label artwork, with the Japanese version usually being the best. A famous example here with Super Mario Bros. And another example here with Castlevania 3 and Super Mario Bros. 3 and The Legend of Zelda. And of course, let's not forget the best artwork disparity of all time. Please, just kill me. Just kill me with my little gun. Famicom cartridges were colorful and unique to one another. Each publisher had the freedom to manufacture their cartridge as they saw fit, which wasn't unlike what we saw with the Atari 2600, really. In the United States, your cartridge was the same dull gray, regardless of whether you were playing a first or third-party publisher's game. But in Japan, you got these neat little differences. Like look at Konami's cards. They have these little notches in the upper left-hand corner, just like on their MSX cartridges. Or take this IREM cartridge, proudly displaying the publisher's logo at the top. Unless you were playing Zelda or an unlicensed game, Americans got nothing but boring gray. Finally, let's talk about the music. The Famicom had superior sound in comparison to the NES. You see, the Famicom's audio circuit actually looped through the 60-pin cartridge connector, which would allow for developers to use special sound chips in their cartridges for enhanced audio. Sadly, this feature was eliminated when the Famicom made its way to the West with the NES, though this can be corrected by a simple modification. Unfortunately, Konami was the only publisher taking advantage of this feature, but the results were pretty incredible. Let's take a listen. Expansion audio was also widely used in games for the Famicom disk system through the RAM expansion adapter, but we'll save that for another case for another day. While I'm a huge fan of the Famicom, it does come with its fair share of issues, and we're going to cover those in cross-examination. Okay, the controllers suck. They just suck, okay? They look cool, they perform well, but they suck. They're too damn short. It's actually impossible to integrate a Famicom into your setup and actually play games from the sofa. So unless you're interested in sitting inches from your television, you're not playing a Famicom. As I mentioned earlier, the controllers themselves are actually attached to the motherboard itself. Not only are they attached to the motherboard, they're actually attached to the front of the motherboard, then routed to the rear of the console at a massive sacrifice to the length of the cables. The Japanese cables themselves are only 18 inches in length. So small. By contrast, the NES controller cords were humongous, bulbous by comparison, at over 90 inches in length. So if you're an American viewer, let's just sit back and revel in our excellence. Yeah. That animation cost me $3,700. Next, we need to talk about another major issue with the Famicom. It only outputs in RF. If you're under the age of 35 and not familiar with RF, essentially a console would output analog video and mono audio through the same cable. That cable would then connect to your television, and the video and audio signals would be transmitted over a radio frequency, hence the name RF, accepted by your television. The Famicom would output RF signals to Japanese Channel 1 or Channel 2 to Japanese televisions. This translates to essentially US channels 95 and 96. Now, if you're planning on playing a Famicom on an American CRT, you essentially have two options. First, find yourself an RF demodulator that displays channels 95 or 96 onto your television. The cheapest of which is just to find a cheap VCR. It doesn't even matter if the VCR plays tapes anymore. As long as it powers on, it should probably work. If you don't want to integrate a VCR into your setup, and I can understand why, you could always try to find a newer, quote, cable-ready CRT, which will display channels 95 or 96. There's also a third option if you're looking to play a Famicom onto a vintage CRT, like my sexy Sony KV-1217 from 1980. I'm not going to get into how you can do that here, but you should really check out this amazing video from Displaced Gamers for more information. I'll leave a link in the description below. Of course, you could always just buy an AV Famicom, which outputs composite video, but the problem with the AV Famicom is that the AV Famicom isn't cool. For starters, it's not a Famicom. It's an AV Famicom. It also looks just like the top-loader NES with the stupid dog bone controller. Did I mention it's also not a Famicom? It's an AV Famicom. I mean, where's the challenge there? It's like showing up to doggy obedience training with a golden retriever. It's like, hey, you must be a really great dog owner. Look how well-behaved your dog is. Well, yeah, it's a golden retriever. It's literally a walking cheat code. Meanwhile, the Famicom is like showing up with a Jack Russell Terrier. That little shit will be chewing on your furniture again the minute you get home. And you'll love it anyway. If none of these options sound appealing to you, you could always modify your Famicom to output either composite video or RGB for better picture quality. However, if you're familiar with the EverDrive line of products, their creator Crix has also introduced the RGB Blaster, a product that provides RGB video and audio through a DIN connector without the need to modify your original console. I'll leave a link to that product in the description below. And if you're in the PAL regions, honestly, I have no idea how to help you guys. Maybe just, I don't know, stop being European. There's a start. Yeah, $3,700. So yeah, the Famicom is kind of a pain in the ass, but do the positives outweigh the negatives? Yes, they do, but at what cost? Let's take a look at some forensic evidence and find out. So just how much will a Famicom cost you in 2023? Well, it's kind of a broad question. Do you want a fixer-upper or one that looks like it's in good shape? Finding Famicoms online is actually really easy, though it's also really easy to find some that are faded by years and years of exposure to direct sunlight. So you could always buy a console in need of deep cleaning and some retro brighting if you're looking to save some money. Usually those examples go for under $50, but what about one that's in really good shape? In scouring eBay, I was able to find examples for about $50 all the way up to $150 for something like this example here, complete in box. To be clear, I'm not suggesting you spend anywhere over $100 for a Famicom, but if you're able to find a clean, non-yellowed one in good working condition for around $50, I think that's a pretty good price. But if you're really looking for a deal, you're best served scouring Japanese auction sites. My personal favorite is Buyee, that's BUYEE.jp. I'll leave a link in the description below. Keep in mind that whenever you buy from a Japanese auction site like Buyee, you'll have to pay for the seller's shipping to the distribution center, in addition to Buyee's insurance and global shipping to you. Be prepared to tack on upwards of $30 to the price of whatever you find. But don't let that discourage you. There are some real bargains to be found. Like take this fixer-upper I found for just $6. Yeah, it needs some replacement stickers and maybe a good cleaning, but it's in great shape. On the higher end, I've found a mint example, complete in box, for just over 30 bucks. In addition, most games for the Famicom are fairly inexpensive. Sure, there are some outliers out there, but for the most part, you can find most quality Famicom games for well under 40 bucks. In fact, each game featured here from my collection in this video was less than $20, aside from Castlevania 3, Kid Dracula, and the original Rockman. Of course, you could always just skip the games and go the flashcard route. I would personally recommend the EverDrive N8 Pro Fami, which gives you near 100% compatibility with the Famicom library, it gives you expansion audio support, and the ability to play Famicom Disk System games, in addition to Famicom games released in every region across the globe. It's currently selling for about $185, and honestly, that's like buying 10 Famicom games. Just get an EverDrive. Okay, so the console and the games are fairly inexpensive, but if you want to integrate your Famicom into a modern setup or into a non-cable ready CRT, you're going to have to spend some money on modifications. The easiest and least expensive mod is the composite video mod, which will run you about $75 to $100, assuming you need to hire a professional modder to install the product. If you'd like to spring for RGB, be prepared to spend over $200 for parts and labor. However, remember that RGB Blaster I was talking about earlier? Simply plug in your game on top and your favorite RGB cable into the DIN connector, and you're good to go for only 150 bucks. So if you want to get a completely stock Famicom, be prepared to spend anywhere from $30 to $75 for a console in decent shape. If you want any modifications done to your console, you're probably going to end up spending on average around another $150. So you're looking at anywhere from $180 to $225, and that's even before you start to begin to think about games or a flash card. That's a pretty steep price for sure, so let's look at a more cost-effective option: emulation. Now, because I only play video games on original hardware, I don't know a whole lot about emulation. Hashtag emulation is for quitters. Because of that, I would like to call an expert witness to the stand. Calling Zez Retro. Zez is the creator of the Zez Retro YouTube channel. He hosts the Cathode Ray podcast with the world's greatest CRT repairman, RetroTech. And Zez is a contributor to RetroRGB.com. On top of all of that, Zez is a Mr. Aficionado, logging hundreds of hours into the latest and greatest FPGA-based emulation platform. Good afternoon, Zez. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay, look, I'm keeping my hands up, all right? I've seen enough episodes of CSI, and I know how the American legal system works. I ain't taking any chances. I got a lawyer here that looks like an elderly Kyle Rittenhouse, all right? I ain't messing with this.
You have to say yes. You just say yes.
I'm not gonna.
We're doing a bit.
Come on.
Dude, we're just doing a bit for the show. Okay, thank you, Zez. Why don't you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about how well the Famicom performs in emulation?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Famicom emulation is done. It's done. It's over. It's solved. There's nothing more. There's no more mysteries in those chips. Wherever you go, you are going to get a good emulation solution if you are trying to work and play with the Famicom or the NES. All right, here's the deal. The first publicly available, widely available, free NES emulator was put out in April 1997. That's 26 years ago. That's old enough. That's as old as Roger's shirt. That's old. We've been doing this for a long time. It's well understood. Famicom, NES, expansion audio, Famicom Disk System, all the extra bits that go on with it, your light guns, change it, it's all handle, and you don't need to get that janky old short controller RF. I've got to tune to the channel 193 or something like that. An emulator will serve you just fine. Get yourself a Mister already. You get a little snack solution there. You can use a light gun on your CRT. You can use your original controllers, and you'll get the same quirks. There are hardware bugs. All of that will happen in Mister, and all of that will happen in emulators. You're going to have a good time. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to say Famicom emulation is better than real hardware. I'm just trying to say Famicom emulation is solid, accurate, and well understood. Which more I can say about the opening arguments of this lawyer in the video. Why is he talking about the Famicom? He grew up in America with the NES. This is cultural appropriation.
Says, thank you for your time, sir. You may leave the witness stand.
Thing. Oh my God, it's my life in laming over here.
You may leave.
I ain't going. What are you talking about? I thought we were here for the next 3 hours.
You may leave the witness stand.
No, come on. We gotta...
All right, I'm ending the call now. Goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you. After reviewing all the evidence, I've reached a verdict. It is this court's verdict that you should buy a Nintendo Famicom. The Nintendo Famicom has left a storied legacy, not only on gaming, but on pop culture itself. The Famicom launched Nintendo from a small toy company into a household name known throughout the world. Its unique, timeless design, its incredible game library, and enhanced audio support are all excellent reasons to purchase a Famicom. And yes, it only outputs RF, which will present a host of issues if you're looking to integrate the console into your modern gaming setup, and the controller length is awful. It guarantees that you won't be able to play the Famicom comfortably from your sofa. Because of this, some modifications may be necessary to enjoying the Famicom, thus adding to your cost, but there are some pretty thrifty workarounds to enjoying your console without the need for breaking the bank. If you do have the money, about $200 will get you all that is necessary to modify your Famicom to be enjoyed in your modern gaming setup. Yes, it performs phenomenally well in emulation, but to me, the Famicom is a perfect example of an affordable addition to your collection, even in 2023. That concludes our trial today. Join us next time for case number 23-02, The People versus the Neo Geo AES. I'm 8-Bit Esquire, and until next time, court is adjourned.